Blessed Father, after reading some Holy Fathers, parts of the Philokalia, and several councils of recent elders, I perceive that contraception, clearly and indisputably, marital relations during pregnancy as well, very clearly, as well as after a woman fertility age, are at least sinful. In some cases, even very dangerous, like relations during pregnancy as described in the Explanatory. Yes. Do I need to get into that? Why that's the case? It seems like you've come to your conclusion. Is that correct, or did I hit a position which is excellently not the consensus? So let me read it again. Contraception, one thing. Marital relations during pregnancy, second thing. As well as marital relations after a woman's fertility age are sinful, and maybe even worse. Let's take one at a time. Contraception. So where is the sin? Where's the missing of the mark in contraception? Well, besides the fact that many forms of contraception are abortifacients, the pill, for instance, obviously you're going to not take the pill because it kills a baby, potentially, right? There are babies who are conceived and implant in the lining of the uterus and then are thrown out because of the chemical that you're taking with the pill. So obviously that's out. Obviously, contraception in which you're throwing the seed, which is essentially kind of an onanism or self-abuse and all this, which is where pleasure and purpose are no longer connected, and now it's all just self-satisfying and self-centered, and it's not procreating, it's not producing something, it's not bringing forth fruit, right? That's also. But is there any contraception that doesn't do one or the other? No, not that I know of, because then you would have possibility for conception. So yes, contraception is very problematic for many reasons. One of the other reasons that it's problematic is there's no trust in God, right? I'm going to now intervene in the process that God arranged and set up and how I was designed, and I'm going to shut down this process, even though I want the pleasure that comes from it. I'm going to short circuit the whole thing with the means, and therefore I'm not going to allow for God and his providence to work in my life. Obviously, there's not going to be any possibility of a conception of a child. So because I want that pleasure, I'm going to continue to, take these pills or whatever so that I can get the pleasure. Obviously, that's not godly. Is that obvious? Isn't that obvious that that's not ascetic? That's not self-sacrificing. That's not love. That has nothing to do with God. So contraception in every way, I don't know what Orthodox, there's people out there who say Orthodox believe in contraception. I've heard that as an accusation of papists. Papal Protestants say, oh, the Orthodox accept contraception. That's nonsense. The Orthodox are not Joe Schmo over on the corner. It's not Father so-and-so, Father Bob and Father Jim. That's not the Orthodox. The Orthodox are the saints. Show me a saint who said, yeah, you go ahead and have your sexual relations all you want and use the pill. You know anybody like that? Anybody like that? St. Nectarios? Anybody? No. All right, so that's the first thing. Contraception, out. Marital relations during pregnancy, again, for the same reason. There's no way for conception to happen. Now, having said that, that's the akrivia. That's the norm. What in some extreme cases spiritual fathers do, there are exceptions. I've heard exceptions for extreme cases. And so there always are some extreme cases for economia. That's proper economia. When it's an extreme case and the spiritual father in his wisdom says, in this case, we're going to allow this because something worse would come about if it didn't. And that's with a blessing of a spiritual father. And he takes that responsibility, and it's very grave. But the answer is no. There are no blessings for sexual relations during pregnancy. That's the main, and that's the answer. All right. So now, if you go to your spiritual father and say, this is really exceptional, well, then that's that particular case. It's not general. Finally, what about women after fertility? In other words, that's a bit, not always the same, but anywhere between what some women have it as early as in their 40s. Others as late as late 50s. It's a period that depends. on the woman. And so then now she's after menopause and there's no way of conception. The norm, the akrivia, is that we stop, that we no longer have relations. That's what spiritual fathers who I know in Greece, Manathos, elders, that's what they would teach. Why? Well, for the reason we just cited in terms of the conception, pleasure, and purpose, but also because, look, we're going to die. We're on our way. And if you're in 50s and 60s, you should have that in mind. You have brothers and sisters who are dying left and right in their 50s and 60s today. My father-in-law and my mother-in-law died at 69. They didn't live until their ripe old age. And there, in your life, I'm sure there are innumerable people. So when you are at this point now, the children have come, if God sent children, and you're now looking toward eternity. And you want to grow in the love of God and self-sacrifice and purity and all the rest. And now it's time to offer up that energy, that desire to God. It's time to turn to God. The couple then ceases going like this and starts to go like this and looks to God. Hand in hand, yes. Brother and sister, yes, absolutely. Struggling, co-strugglers, absolutely. But now the focus is on the one that unites them, and not the purpose of marriage is still for unity in God. But the sexual part that played a big part of their life for 2 decades or 3 decades, that comes to an end. It doesn't come to an end when we're 82 and we're on our deathbed. That's not normal. That's something sick. We need to struggle to give it up. Now, it's hard. If you've been with somebody for 20, 30, 40 years, I guess it could be, no, it couldn't be 40. You'd be married at 10 or something. But 30 years, possible, right? And obviously you've been united to that person innumerable times in sexual relations. And so it becomes very much a part of your existence and how you understand and relate to that person. And it's hard, but it's a good struggle. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it needs to happen. So the answer is work toward that goal. Read St. Paisios in Family Life, in like page, I want to say 30 or 40. He's got a long footnote there. What did he say about relations in marriage over time and how people begin to live like brothers and sisters? In there on page like 30, wait, I actually have it here. Let me read it to you. All right, here's the response. Here's the patristic answer for all of you like me who are in the 50s, 60s, whatever, right? And the question is, how do we live? How do we live now with our spouse, our husband, our wife? And I'm going to read it to you so you don't have to go and look it up. Regarding the subject of conjugal relations of married priests, but even of lay people, which you mentioned to me, this is St. Paisios writing a letter. Since the Holy Fathers do not determine how these should be precisely, this means that these are not something that can be so determined simply because all human beings cannot be fitted into one mold. The Fathers leave this subject to the discernment, the philotimo, the spiritual sensitivity and the strength of each person. In order to make myself more understandable, let me tell you about some struggling married priests and laymen who are now living and are personally known to me. Among them are those who had sexual relations after marriage and had 1, 2, or 3 children and then lived as brother and sister, as virgins. He says virginally, parthenika, or something like that, probably in Greek. I don't know. I could look at the Greek. Very interesting. Now, somebody was asking me about how is there chaste chastity in marriage. Right there is an example. Right there. Others come together only once a year for the purpose of procreation, and then live together without sexual relations as brother and sister. He's giving you examples of virtuous strugglers who were married, priests or laymen. First one, 3-4 children, then they live as brothers and sisters. Next group, they came together once a year in order to have a child, and then they lived as brothers and sisters. Others abstained during the periods of fasting and then resumed their relations, right? That's pretty basic. I think that's a basic stance of most, or should be. The struggle should be that for those who are in their, years of procreation, that they fast with the church, obviously. Others cannot uphold even this practice. Others, again, come together only once in the middle of the week. So it is 3 days before and 3 days after Holy Communion. So it'd be Tuesday night, basically. Others will stumble even here. And this is why Christ's first words when he appeared to the apostles after the resurrection were, "As my Father has sent me, even so I send you. Receive ye the Holy Spirit. Whoever sins you remit, ye are remitted unto them. And whoever sins you retain, they are retained." So he's clearly saying that beyond this pale, you are in the land of sin, right? If you cannot refrain from relations even that much, so that you want to have it more than once a week, and you're putting off communion, and you're breaking the fast. I think he was talking about the fast. During the fast, you're breaking the fast, and you have relations in the fast. At this point now, you're not struggling, you're not fasting, you're not living an ascetic life. By the way, a lot of people are in this category today. A lot of Orthodox Christians are in this category because there's no teaching, because there's no. Now they can read this and they can become philotimi, right? And they can start to struggle. It's up to them. They don't need a blessing to struggle spiritually, to be more fast more on this level. The goal here is for each couple to struggle with discernment and philotimo. Do you hear that? Do you remember I just said about discernment? So he's saying you got to have discernment. There's no way around it. You got to acquire discernment and philotimo, right? The desire to struggle, the desire to outdo the other in goodness and patience and love. So the goal here is for each couple to struggle with discernment and philotimo according to their spiritual strength. In the beginning, naturally, the age of the couple will not help. But as the years pass and the flesh is weakened, the spirit can prevail more, allowing the married couples to begin experiencing some divine delights. Then they can withdraw naturally from the carnal pleasures, which they now consider less important. This way, the married are also purified and reach paradise by way of the more comfortable path with its gradual turns. Monastics, however, head straight up, climbing the mountain crags, and reach paradise in that way. You must keep in mind that the subject of conjugal relations is not a matter for you alone. You have no right to regulate it on your own by yourself, but rather by agreement, according to St. Paul. Even when this consensus is reached, there is need for careful attention. The strong must take the position of the weak. Many times, to prevent disappointing one another, one may reluctantly agree, but are internally tormented. This happens more often to women. They're not interested in the relations, and the man is, and she acquiesce, he's saying. And he says, actually, this may occur particularly in women who have little fear of God and strong carnal instincts. Oh, he's talking about the opposite, actually. Many times, because they are not discerning, some pious men who have the consent of their wives proceed thoughtlessly into a long period of abstinence. And then the women may be tormented and burst out in neurotic behavior and so on. So he's taking the opposite example. Yes. Well, see, this is the kind of thing you hear about in confession a lot, actually, that there's no sensitivity to the other person's need on both ends, right? And in many ways. And that he's saying that's not blessed. That's not blessed. Because there's no philotimo in that, right? There's no desire for the others out of love for the other. Such men may imagine that their wives have advanced more in the virtue and desire to live a more chaste life over long periods of time. But this may open the way to temptation for the women, and then they desire friends. And when this happens, once having fallen, they are troubled by their conscience, while their husbands are still trying to live a more chaste life, believing that their wives are doing the same thing. This situation gives them the wrong impression because they think they have advanced in the spiritual life and do not desire carnal pleasures. A natural cause of this may be the justified feminine pride and the envy of the women who feel inferior. The wife, seeing the husband desiring to live more spiritually, constrains herself and tries to outdo him. Forgive me for entering into unknown vineyards, for the work of the monk is to pray with his prayer rope and not these delicate matters. But so as not to distress you, I force myself to respond to your concern by writing a few things that I understand from afar, which torment our brothers and sisters in the world and give cause to the enemy. It is more important that both spouses be on the same level regarding their bodily constitution. When it happens that one is temperate and the other is more energetic, there is need for sacrifice on the part of the stronger toward the weaker. So the weaker is aided to receive spiritual health gradually, and then together they can proceed. So this is beautiful patristic wisdom here. And of course, it's coming from a great ascetic. And isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting, brothers and sisters, that wisdom is coming from the desert? And this is a rebuttal to all of those unwise, worldly minded, whether they be laymen or priests in the world, who say monks can't teach us about the married life. Ha ha. They teach us about a lot and much more than we could probably ever know. So we should humble ourselves because they understand the human condition. There it is. Let's see if we can get it. All right. Family Life, Volume 4 in Spiritual Counsels by St. Paisios. The key I want you to take away with, here, folks, is the philotimo. He leaves it to the philotimo of each one. How much do you want to struggle? How much do you have in it to live for the spiritual life, live for the next life? You can't regulate this legalistically, moralistically. You can't answer it abstractly, theoretically. It's going to depend on each person's desire and struggle to be with God. And of course, he's very wise, and it's very true that you have to walk. There's a reason why they're called syzygy, right? Syzygy in Greek. You know what that means? It's the page. You guys want the page number? I see you want the page number. So page 67. Page 67, footnote number 4. Page 67, footnote number 4. Syzygy is the Greek term for yoke mate. And if you look at we are yoke mates, the people who are married, right? We're not alone. Monachos means somebody who's alone. And we're not called people who are alone. We're married. We have a husband and wife, and they're yoked together. And what does that mean in practice? It's when the two animals, whether it be cows or whatever it is, they have a yoke over them, right? And what does that do? It keeps them walking together so they can plow together, right? That's the term in Greek. Syzygy, right? That's what we are. We're yoked together in marriage, and we have to walk together. So when one of us is struggling, the other has to slow down and be there by their side. And in this particular context with sexual relations, that means that there'll be women or men, husbands or wives, who will, if they're discerning, have philotimo, and they apply it properly, not just zeal, not according to knowledge, but zeal with love. They're going to sacrifice. Yes, they're going to sacrifice, and they're going to have relations with their husband or wife, even though they don't want it. They're done with it. They want to move on. They're ready for spiritual life more deep. They're not interested. But if they love their husband and wife, they're going to not, and they're not going to make it like, oh, condescending, I'll have relations with you. Oh, I guess I'll have to be with you. That's not what he means. He means shut your mouth and show love and engage your husband or wife as if nothing has happened. Now, at the same time, you're going to struggle and you're going to bring each other up. It's going to be both and. That's the both and we're looking for. Now, that's different than saying it's blessed. Have relations even after menopause. That's not the same. He's not saying that. All right. Pay attention. He's not saying that. He's saying struggle to put off those carnal relations, those flesh relations. Struggle. But according to your ability, it's not gonna like one day, okay, menopause, it's over. Okay, you can't no more relations. That's how it works. You don't turn the faucet off like that, right? So you've got to be patient, but you've got to struggle. Patient and struggle. Both of them together. That's the both and that we want.